The 80s was a powerful time aesthetically. Big hair, lots of colors, and lots of science fiction. Technology was at a turning point, space exploration was growing, and Barbie was making Mattel over $430 million. This all combined would make who I consider to be an icon of the time, Spectra. A metallic, lacy, spacey, out-of-this-world doll with colorful hair, amazing makeup, and she also is technically a teenage alien. And so when a company makes a doll, how do other companies respond? They make a dupe, or a knockoff, or a heavily inspired rival product. So in 1986, when Mattel released Spectra and her group of space friends, Tonka responded in 1987 with Aurora. The future looks beautiful.
Knocking on my door?
While some could argue that Barbie herself is a bit of a knockoff, her release in 1959 started a huge trend in the United States of the 11.5-inch fashion doll. Creating a doll that could look similar to or share clothing with Barbie not only made for more play opportunities, but more profit, which is what these companies were really going for. A lot of these knockoff dolls from the 60s are actually specifically referred to as clones, and I think that that's because a lot of them would use almost identical or replicas of the actual Barbie face molds as they were made in Hong Kong, and legislation around that was a bit looser at the time, or at least harder to legally manage. While the popularity of making exact clones of course faded with time and lawsuits, other toy companies would constantly be looking towards each other for inspiration or to try and compete with the new things that everyone was releasing. And this competition really only grew through the 80s and 90s, and of course still exists today. The toy industry is not only incredibly profitable, but it's also incredibly competitive. And Mattel would also be guilty of trying to hop onto the bandwagon of other toy lines. While we could look at Bratz and My Scene, one of my favorite examples is Hasbro's Jen and the Holograms, which was a show that connected with a toy line released in 1985 and 86 respectively. Mattel responded with Barbie and the Rockers. Barbie and the Rockers! They essentially made up a band for Barbie to be in to compete with Jen and the Holograms, and kind of the sphere of a musical tie-in toy. There's a lot bigger of a story there, of course, but the main thing to know is competition was fierce, and doll lines would only become more and more unique in an attempt to outsell or outshine competitors. Which leads us really neatly into Spectra.
Spectra coming soon from Mattel.
If you're looking for unique, here she is. The Spectra line of dolls consisted of 4 feminine dolls, 1 masculine doll, a dog, some accessories, and a bed that was designed to buff their metallic bodies. I love this bed conceptually. I think it is so cool. It's very unique. It's supposed to be like a vanity as well. I don't know if the aliens technically need to sleep in their world, but yeah, it's supposed to buff them so they stay really shiny. They really leaned into the uniqueness of the metallic bodies, which I think is very cool. Each of these dolls retailed for $16, which was actually more than Barbies at the time, but that was possibly due to their bodies. So first of all, they were metallic, so they had a coating on them, of course, but these dolls also had a lot of joint articulation, meaning that they could move their body parts at their joints, which was really unique for dolls. Barbie actually wouldn't start to incorporate this into their dolls until after the release of the Spectra line. They were really considered to be this super posable action-y dolls, and you can see that from the packaging of them themselves. They're posed in this very dynamic way, and the boxes themselves also very much fit with this brand of lacy, spacey, so it has the lace at the top, Spectra and the rainbow logo, which I really love, and it's all about her looking different essentially from a Barbie. This is a whole new thing. She's dynamic, she's action, she's out of this world.
I'm a space age girl around.
And with all of that, Mattel apparently thought that they had a smash hit and that this would do really well, and it did not. While I don't have any sales information, stats, or numbers, the line just ended in 1987, meaning it only existed for 1 year of production. They were not selling well. But apparently Mattel was not the only company that thought that these would be a smash hit.
a kid plays with it.
When you think of Tonka, the first thing that comes to mind is probably trucks. Beginning as a gardening company in 1946, Tonka would actually start making metal toys as kind of like a side product for their business. However, it was significantly more successful than selling their gardening tools. So in 1955, they decided to completely rebrand as Tonka Toys Incorporated and focus solely on toy production. While trucks would be the company's kind of iconic main brand item, they would also attempt to release a few different doll lines through the 80s. Interestingly enough, this might be because Tonka at the time had a little bit of a reputation of poaching executives from Mattel, and even them having like a Mattel mafia within their ranks, as reported in a news article at the time, which is just very interesting. The first doll line I can find from them of note was in 1984, with the company working on what was described in a People article as the next craze, a sort of Barbie goes to outer space toy called Star Fairies, which was almost a little on the nose for what would come. Like, that kind of sounds like Spectra, but it wasn't, and it wasn't Aurora yet either. The Star Fairies line wasn't like super space themed in my opinion. It's definitely more visually kind of like fantasy leaning, and actually the head molds as well as some of the outfits were from a completely different doll line called Flower Fairies by the company Hornby, which also featured this amazing snail carriage. As soon as I saw this, I was like, I have to highlight, like, this is so cute. This, like, what a cute concept. I want that for me. From the sound of it, the Flower Fairy line wasn't doing super well financially, and so Tonka essentially just bought the head molds and remaining stock of clothing from Hornby and used it for the Star Fairy line. This is actually a relatively common practice for this time period. A lot of different dolls released in this era had head molds made from different companies than the actual dolls were released from, essentially. And it just, people were throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what stuck, and doll heads were like going around the world on their little adventures.
Now can we have a party?
Because of that, I don't personally know who designed any of this or the clothing. It would have been, I'm assuming, someone at either Tonka or Hornby or somewhere else. It gets really kind of like hard to find that information considering how much stuff kind of like went from company to company. That being said, the Wikipedia article for Star Fairies actually has like a really in-depth description of the toy line, and it doesn't have a source, which means I'm pretty sure this was just like a collector who probably has a lot of the items writing the descriptions themselves, considering it also has like all of the product codes for everything. So shout out to the fans of the world who are putting in the work to archive this information, because we literally wouldn't have it if they weren't there. So I appreciate you. This line would actually go on to have a Hanna-Barbera television special as well, which included voice acting from child Drew Barrymore. So with Tonka having a few doll lines under their belt by 1987, they were ready to take on a real out-of-this-world Barbie with Aurora. Advertised as the ultimate posable fashion doll, Aurora is pretty visibly inspired by Spectra while still being unique. The doll line consisted of only 4 feminine dolls and a number of different fashion packs or outfits that were released separately. Aurora is a blonde doll with a gold metallic body, Mira with a silver metallic body, get it? She's like a mirror, ha ha ha. Lustra with a slightly darker purple metallic body, or it might be silver. It's hard to tell in photos. She's not one that I own, so she could just be silver, or she might have like a little bit of a purple to her. And lastly, there's Krista, who actually has a crystal body, or is made of a clear plastic that has glitter in it, which I think is really fun. That is one really unique choice that they made with having Krista be essentially different, the non-metallic one. I like her being made of a different material. I always like clear plasticky sort of stuff. It just looks really cool and really of its time, so I thought that that was a cool move to have, like one more actually like totally unique option. These dolls also feature lacy outfits with these sort of like iridescent dynamic patterned skirts and sort of like shawls and capes. They also don't have shoes, but like I don't blame them. Do you really need shoes in space as a metal alien? I don't know. I don't think it like detracts from the looks from them not having shoes, considering the metallic metallic body already looks really cool. And I will say, I do personally think that the outfits between Spectra and Aurora are quite different. I feel like Spectra has a lot, like, leans really into the lace, whereas Aurora doesn't like quite as much. I mean, they're obviously both lacy, but I feel like Aurora utilizes the other like shiny fabric a little bit more than Spectra does. The hairstyle of these dolls also, I would say, is like slicker than the Spectra line. Spectra has this like big volume, and they actually have tinsel in their hair, which looks very 80s and very cool, whereas Aurora went for like a much more pulled back look for all of them. They still have colorful hair, but they're much simpler styles, and I also think it would be easier to like maintain the way the doll's hair looks and have it keep looking nice. Like the Spectra dolls, I feel like that would get quite fuzzy over time.
Spectra, I'd love to fix your sparkling hair.
It also probably was just like frankly less expensive to do the more slicked back options. But of course, the one thing that really stands out to me with the doll line is actually their eyes. If you haven't already noticed, these dolls have crystals instead of painted on eyes, which I think looks so cool. It gives them this really like spacey, out of this world, inhuman look. And actually the reason for the crystal eyes is again down to the head molds. So the head molds were again reused from a different company. These heads are actually from the 1983 Starry-Eyed Bride collection from the Flower Princess line by Creta. Now I will go more in depth on Creta in a future video because I'm planning on covering a doll line specifically released by them. Interestingly enough, Creta would release a one-off doll in the Flower Princess kind of brand called Stardust, which also seems to be kind of leaning into the spacey vibes of Spectra and Aurora. Very little is known about this doll, so I don't know what year she's from and how that like lines up with the timeline, but I do think it's really interesting to have another doll company kind of put out a like spacey, out of this world inspired doll around the same time. The 4 dolls of the Aurora line all share the same flesh color, which is unfortunate considering at least Mattel had a bit more diversity within their line for the head color of the dolls. These dolls are also shorter than the Spectra line. I think they're about 9 or 10 inches, whereas Spectra, I believe, is the 11.5 inches, kind of same as Barbie. That does mean though that they might not be able to share clothing, which is also a little bit of a bummer considering how similar they look. You would think that they would all like fit pretty well in the same universe, but maybe Aurora's like Spectra's younger sister, you know? You also may have noticed through this video that I do own 2 of the Aurora dolls. I actually got these from an estate sale auction, and I think I got each one for about $15, which I would say is a pretty good price. I want to note that I've seen listings online for these dolls for really extreme prices, and I frankly, like, no matter how cool you think these are, don't recommend spending like over $100 on them. I don't think these are worth that much. I get really frustrated when I see people on eBay listing a doll like this for like $250. These dolls, at least specifically, were sold at Hills, which was a discount store. They really specialized in toys at some parts of their business, so I don't know if these were exclusively sold there or if Hills worked like a TJ Maxx where they bought leftover stock and sold it for cheaper. Their listed price was $11.97. Not, I feel like, enough quality rise or frankly like historically wise for collectors to justify $250 on them. I know there's so much nuance with that conversation of how much stuff is worth that I can't get into in this video, but I'm just throwing that out there. I did not buy these for that much, and nor would I recommend anyone else buying them for that much. The other interesting thing is Hills, the company that sold these dolls, also would have sold Barbies, and assuming would have sold Spectra dolls, so it's kind of funny to think of these actually being on a shelf next to each other and like a kid having to go through and pick between them. I don't know why I find that so interesting. The 80s is a time period it's kind of hard to find like flyers from stores, pricing informations, photos of toy aisles. Like, are you gonna waste your film taking a photo of a toy aisle? Probably not. So it can be hard to reference things like pricing and sales demographics. So while I don't know exactly how well the Aurora doll line did, we can also assume that it kind of had the same fate as Spectra, considering we only had 1 release of the dolls and they also faded away after 1987.
She's twirling down from space with galactic fun for you.
So looking back on it, I think both doll lines had a lot of cool and really unique ideas, but were perhaps just like a little too gimmicky and too outside of the norm. Like with Barbie and the Rockers, they did give Barbie like a more dynamic look to match the style of like rock stars at the time, but it was still Barbie and it was still pretty consumer friendly. The Spectra dolls really took that and like cranked it up. It really seemed like Mattel was testing the waters of how far they could go with taking their dolls outside of the box that consumers would still like. Frankly, I think they lean more into the fashion style of Jem and the Holograms, with the geometric makeup, really big colorful hair, and fashion styles that are a bit more outside of the norm for Barbie. But I think they just went a little too far. And while I love these dolls and enjoy them aesthetically today, I could understand consumers maybe not wanting to risk getting their kid or buying themselves a doll that was just like that weird and wasn't gonna quite match up with everything else they own. Now, I have seen a number of posts online with people talking about how much they loved their Spectra dolls or Aurora dolls, and that makes me incredibly happy to see. I think that this was just such a unique line of dolls, such a thing of its time, like the epitome of 80s retro futurism, essentially. And so I really love them. I think that they're really cool, and I'm glad so many other people did get to enjoy them, but it just comes down to the world of toys needing to be profitable, which means we lose a little bit of that uniqueness. But that competition that I mentioned at the start is what got us here in the first place, which I do think is kind of cool. I hope you all have enjoyed this dive into the world of Spectra and Aurora with me. I really enjoy making these doll sort of history videos, and I do have some more planned in the future. If you played with or enjoyed the Spectra or Aurora dolls, I would love to hear more. It's honestly kind of hard sometimes to find Aurora dolls online because of the Disney princess with the same name, so you have to be smart about how you search for them. For the time being, I do think I'm gonna keep my dolls in package, which is funny because I don't like the packaging. As some of you know, I am a big fan of packaging. I find branding and packaging really fun and exciting, but I'm just not a huge fan of this. However, I don't have a good idea of how I would like to display them. So unless I come up with a really cool idea for how I'd like to put them up, they are just gonna keep hanging out in their boxes here. Thank you all so much for joining me. Feel free to give me a like if you enjoyed this video, or subscribe if you would like to see more. Join the Discord for alerts for any time I go live on Twitch or post a video on YouTube, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.